Yesterday, I posted a video interview that I conducted with Ikari, the maker of the SD2SNES and the upcoming SD2SNES Pro, and I covered some of the basic questions that we had about it, since until then the only information we had was through a few tweets from krikzz about it. And it was really cool to have Ikari on, and he gave us a lot to chew on while we wait about a month for it to hit the online shelves. But all day long today, I was chatting with Ikari, asking follow-up questions that people had posted in the chat comments and that I had seen online, and he was kind enough to answer every single question that we had. So he had mentioned that the new SD2SNES Pro would support audio save states, and a lot of people had asked why that's not possible on the original SD2SNES, and the reason is because it's very complex to do. I outlined it in an article for RetroRGB.com where Ikari goes into detail about exactly how he's pulling this off, but the long and short of it is that it requires basically him creating his own APU that he can be the owner of on the hardware in addition to the original one or beside it in order to get the save states working. So it's extremely complex, and you can see that because of the limitations of actual Super Nintendo hardware, it's really hard to pull off, and so that's where the nearly twice as capable and twice as much RAM of the Cyclone 4 versus the Spartan 3 that's on the original comes in handy on the SD2SNES Pro. And the next question that I had was, people were asking if the SD2SNES project was over. The original, the goal of it was to launch the SD2SNES, a hardware platform where you never really have to get an update. And in fact, if you bought the very first revision of the SD2SNES like I did when it first came out, you could use every single feature that ever existed for it. So every special chip that was ever released, all of the MSU1 stuff, it all worked right from the very beginning until the end. So it reached the goal of the project, which was to have an open source platform for Super Nintendo development. And it's at end of life now because the Spartan 3 hasn't been made for at least a year. So right now, Ikari has been buying out of production Spartan 3s, which are expensive. They cost more than a Cyclone 4, and it's kind of it's at the end of its life. They're not even going to be for sale soon enough, so it's good to get moving over to something different. Ikari answered my question. He said that the SD2SNES project is going to live on, and you are going to get SDD1 for it, for example, as soon as that's ready to be released by Magno. And you are probably going to get the SPC 7110 implementation, which Ikari said to me in the chat was tentative, but actually tentative is probably the wrong word. In other words, he's got it probably pretty much working already. So that's coming to the SD2SNES. So 2 more special chips, in addition to anything else that's possible on the hardware. The issue is that the hardware itself is going to hit a wall of what the Spartan 3 is capable of, and there would be nothing that can ever be done to overcome that. It just has so many logic elements available and so much RAM on it that you do hit that wall. Like, you can't combine Super FX and MSU1 on the Spartan 3. It's physically impossible to fit it in there, no matter what kind of trickery you try to do. But with the new Cyclone 4, you can. And you can also do a few more special chips that weren't possible on the old one, plus a whole lot of new stuff. So the SD2SNES project lives on. It reached its goal of being a piece of hardware that never needed to be updated. And in fact, the only thing that the revisions ever did for it were to play around with the way that it handled MSU1 audio processing. And by revision H, you had a dedicated op-amp just for MSU1 audio. That's how hardcore it got. And then in revision J, the only difference was that it switched over to microSD. And now the SD2SNES Pro, which is also known as the Mark III, which you're going to see on the PCBs, so SD2SNES Mark III, it's basically an upgrade to the SD2SNES. And that brought up the question that some people had asked, could they use, if you had bought like the LED pipe version of the cart that was sold by like Stone Age Gamer, where you can see the LEDs through it, it's kind of cool. Will that work? Would the SD2SNES Pro PCB fit in that? Because the SD2SNES Pro PCB is far more complex than the original too. It's a 4-layer PCB. All of the components are front-facing. It's very nice. And Ikari said that he put a lot of care into making sure that the LEDs are in the exact same place as before. and so they'll work with all of those light guides or pipes or whatever you want to call them. It'll also fit in those original cartridges. If you had an old shell, like I have my original red translucent, super cool krikzz translucent shell, which he stopped making a while ago. I put, every time I buy a new SD2SNES revision, I just put the PCB in there, and it's the one I have. And so I'll be able to use that with this new SD2SNES Pro. So it'll fit in there, and the only difference is that, like, you know, it switched from regular SD to micro SD, so that slot is going to be bigger than it needs to be on top, and then the USB slot is a little bit bigger than it needs to be, so it'll just have slightly bigger holes on the top of it is the only difference. So your SD2SNES carts are back on the menu, boys, so you can use those. So thank you to Ikari for putting that into it. He also shared some pretty cool prototyping pictures with me that I will be showing here, including what looks like a wood kind of PCB template that he's been using to fit parts, and some other cool things. He thinks that the final SD2SNES Pro will be printed on a black matte PCB, which will be very high-end looking, and that will be made in Ukraine again by krikzz. And yeah, let's see, I think that's all of the updates I had for you that answered basically all of our questions. So don't worry, SD2SNES lives on. You're still going to get updates, you're going to get new chips, and everything is good. It'll keep working. It won't just stop working when the SD2SNES Pro comes out. But if you do want the SD2SNES Pro, my advice to you is just put your SD2SNES on eBay, describe it perfectly, say what revision it is, put your location, and do not include an SD card whatsoever, and it'll sell for within $10 of what the retail cost of an SD2SNES is, I guarantee it, because that's what I did. I had 3 revisions of it. I had the very original SD2SNES, and then I upgraded to F, I believe, or G, one of those 2 revisions, and I got all the parts basically to upgrade it myself to revision H, but then I was like, you know what, screw this. I just listed it on eBay at the exact retail price as a buy it now, and somebody bought it within like 2 hours. So the only thing it cost me to go from revision F or G to H was like that 10% fee that eBay charged. So it's basically with all of the EverDrives hold their value, and you can get a free upgrade by doing that, basically, minus those fees. So if you have an SD2SNES and you want to get the Pro, don't worry, it's held its value. All of those listings you see on eBay at $130 for the SD2SNES are Chinese clones, and they're garbage, and everyone knows that, and that's why they're so cheap. And they don't work with MSU1, and they have all sorts of different problems. And there was even a hilarious scandal where somebody was posting some pictures of, oh, they bought an SD2SNES clone on eBay, and they opened it up, and it was the Super EverDrive clone of like the version 1.0 inside of it. So don't buy those clones, and everybody knows that. And so if you're located like in the US or Europe, people would rather buy from you and get it fast. The people who don't care about the revisions, like we care about that. Believe it or not, the majority of people on Earth don't actually care or even know about the differences. So just sell it on there and just be explicit about what it is, and you'll get exactly what you paid for it. It held its value really well. And so for, you know, 15 or 20 bucks, you can upgrade to the Pro, because another thing that I didn't cover in my video is what krikzz said. The SD2SNES Pro is going to be the exact same retail price as the SD2SNES, so it's not going up in price, even though you're getting double the RAM. The Spartan 4 has 70 to 80% more logic space on it than the Spartan 3 did, so Cyclone 4 is pretty awesome FPGA. And if you guys don't know how that works, just like your Super NT and your Misters, the FPGA chip on the SD2SNES, when you flash a special chip on there, it gets programmed into the FPGA, and it's working the same way as like a Mister special effects chip, or the same way that the Super NT works to reconfigure itself. That's how it works. So it's the magic of FPGAs, and that's why you can get like absolute one-to-one perfect hardware real implementations of cool chips and things like that. So a huge thank you to Ikari for following up with me and for taking all my questions today and answering every single one of them in amazing detail. So this is pretty awesome, and it's great news for everybody who loves the SD2SNES, who has one already, and who's been thinking about getting the Pro. So don't worry, if you bought an SD2SNES, just put it out there on the used market, and you're going to get pretty much everything you paid for it. And think of that as the universal discount, the universal coupon code for anything you want. It's good hard cash, greenback dollars if you're in the US. So go grab the Pro. I'm going to be pre-ordering it the second that it's available. So a huge thank you, and I'll catch you guys next time.